Okay, we probably should get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Sheehy. This is Gabriel. We're going to talk today about becoming a historian, our creation of a high school history lab at North Andover High. Little background on the two of us. I've been a teacher at North Andover High for 12 years now. I'm the history department coordinator. This is my second year doing that wonderful job of observing other teachers and attending meetings upon meetings. I teach AP Euro. I teach sports in the past, sports and American culture, as I'll talk about later. Sports is kind of my thing. Gabe?
Yes, I am a senior at North Andover High School, so I've spent 4 years there. This is my first ever presentation in this sort of setting, but I've taken many history classes, especially with Mr. Sheehy. I took his Euro class, lots of fun. And I started working in the history lab with him first week of December, I believe. And we've been working in there ever since, and I will continue to do that until I graduate. And hopefully I'll come back a few times afterwards.
So, where did this come from? Two different origin stories. The first one is, got a text from one of the other teachers in my department. He's like, hey, you have to check this out. And it was a video of the guy on the right, Stephen Scully at Westford Academy, doing a simulation of trench warfare. Started researching him, and he has some cool things in his classroom. He's got like antique desks, he's got typewriters that kids use, so object-based learning. During one of our professional development days, half the history department went over there and we observed what they were doing over there. And the department thought it was really, really kind of cool. And I'll get to it in a minute, how we kind of continued that. I've always loved history. I don't think I really truly understood or loved history until I was in college and I worked as an intern at the Lawrence History Center, lugging all kinds of old tax documents around and really kind of getting into what it means to be a historian. So part of the reason I wanted to create this lab was to kind of convey that to my students. Okay. Story of the lab. So we did the observation over at Westford Academy, and hadn't really moved forward on the creation of the lab. This is the slide I like to call the tragedy and triumph slide. This past winter, my uncle and my father passed away. So I had to clean out my uncle's house, triple decker in Lawrence, 100+ years of Sheehy history. And it's tough to throw that stuff away. So I'm pulling out vacuums, I'm pulling out these historical artifacts. And I'm like, wow, I can take these and bring them to school and really kind of get the lab going, kind of kickstart the whole process. So here is, I found a bunch of pictures of my grandfather and his service in World War II. So just started taking some of those items. This is my other grandfather. So taking these objects that we had taken out of my grandmother's house, my father's house, and bringing them to school to share with the students. And there's obviously a picture of me, my students bored, listening to me talk about all these wonderful objects. We also got some help. I mean, this isn't just me bringing in items from my family. Also got some help from the Stevens Memorial Library in town. They went and contacted the state archive and they donated a bunch of books that they had digitized that they were getting rid of. The North Andover Historical Society had extras of a lot of stuff. Again, just to populate our lab. And people started donating stuff too. We got some uniforms donated, some different items donated that really kind of added to the collection. How do you fund this? In my side job, I'm the president of the Essex Baseball Organization. Like I said, sports is kind of my thing. I've been doing that for a long time. Up there's Bethany. Spencer Pierce Little Farm, Essex Baseball Club. Make sure you go and check us out. We do an annual fundraiser for breast cancer, but and it's for my mother who passed away from breast cancer like 5 years ago. And part of the funding was for education. So again, need to build up this lab, need to create items for the kids to experience You need money. So I took some of the funds from this fundraiser, and I started buying some stuff to kind of build the collection, make it really kind of exciting for our students. Also, we just recently got a grant, I better say it right, from the State Historical Records Advisory Board. We got $7,500 from them to put together oral histories for veterans. As you'll see when we go through the rest of the slide, one of the things that we've really been able to do is kind of create museum walks for World War I and World War II. The goal of this grant that we have is to take the oral histories of veterans, or even reading soldiers' diaries and things like that who have passed, and matching them with objects. Because one of the things that we found with the creation of this lab is when students can pick up items, pick up objects, they really appreciate that more than just sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher talk. And that object really kind of brings to life for them the history, and it makes history kind of enjoyable and engaging, which we'll get to in a minute. Gabe?
So here you can see some of the photos of the lab. Now Mr. Sheehy's talked a lot about how we created it, how we got money, and how we kind of got the word out, but this really is what the lab is all about. The picture on the right here is a display, I believe this is of the World War I display we had up. And so the lab, it's in a room, it's the high school's history lab. And in it we have lots of artifacts. As you can see, there's some pictures, postcards. And so the way that it's set up, right now, it's currently in the World War II phase. However, because we have so many different exhibits, it's very easy to switch in and out from World War I to World War II, or to other timelines and events and exhibits that we have set up. So it's kind of like a vessel for teaching history, in the sense of you can cater it towards any lesson or any subject that you're trying to teach, or any area of history that you're trying to teach currently. On the right is an example of students actually learning in the lab. There's a lot of tangible artifacts, as well as research that I've done, Mr. Sheehy's done, and other teachers have done to kind of put it together in order to convey the lessons to the students. And so this is a picture of them. It's like a round table sort of. It's kind of like a walking through in order to learn the lesson.
We broke up for the World War I museum walk. We broke it into 12 or 13 different categories. So students would be kind of separated in here. You're going to go to station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. And each section had a different theme. We had like the war begins, the world at war. We had songbooks, we had stereoscopes, we had pictures, like actual World War I pictures. So students would kind of stop and have a couple minutes at each station, and they would look at those objects, and they would have to break down those objects and answer questions for their teacher. Their teachers did this in numerous ways, which is kind of the cool thing about this lab. If you want your students to just break down primary source material, well, at each section, have them pick a postcard, have them pick a newspaper, have them pick a propaganda poster, and analyze that. You want them to look at trends or themes within that section, they can do that as well. Pick an object you like, and for homework tonight, you're gonna go home and research it. Those are some of the things that our teachers did. They did a variety of different things. Just to backtrack, this used to be our history office. I kind of hijacked our history office. Tons of support from our administration. Principal let me do this. The superintendent thinks it's a great idea. Assistant superintendent was all on board, so I did get a lot of support from the North Andover school community. Another example you could see. You can see the stereoscopes here. The kids really enjoy these. They're like, what is this? And you show them the 3D image. It kind of brings, again, history to life, and that's what we're really trying to do here. The helmets. These are 2 World War I helmets, and there's dents in them. And they're like, how do those dents come there? How do you think? So it just builds that inquiry, and they start kind of breaking down, why did that happen? How is that? So just, again, getting our students to think.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's really special about this lab is that, and we talked about this in an earlier presentation with you, about how all these tangible artifacts can kind of convey to students that history isn't something that's locked away in a box in the Smithsonian, in Washington, D.C., across the country, in Paris. It's something that you can actually hold and see, and it's something that's all, constantly surrounding us and something that involves every single one of us. And for someone like me and Mr. Sheehy, we're so motivated to learn and go find that history. And so it's not hard for me, to walk into a museum and find 30 things that I love and just spend 3 hours in there. But for other students, it really isn't that way. And so it's our job to kind of take our joy and our passion for history and for that learning and then turn that into a lesson. And how can we take, these artifacts, like I mentioned, that might be in the Smithsonian, how can we kind of convey them to our students in this way?
We're not going to watch the video. If you're really interested in watching the YouTube video, there's a video of the North Andover Camp Studio put together. It goes through the lab, interviews me about what we're trying to do. A couple items here. Again, this is my grandfather's diary that we have. Started transcribing it so that, again, I can then take those experiences of my grandfather during the war and create lessons and activities for my students to do. Of course, all he really did the first part of the war is play softball and go to, he was stationed in like New York. He went to Yankees games. And so like, oh, I guess I got to skip ahead a little bit to get to that. Here's his discharge papers. One of the things I'm really fascinated by, and when you show kids, we just got a bunch of World War II vaccination records and pay records. So the kids are really fascinated by just seeing something that it doesn't seem like history, but it is. What are they being vaccinated for? And you can have those discussions with your students about that. The dog tags, they really like those. We'll probably come back to those later. Gabe really likes the belt buckles. So what's the goal? To make history fun, engaging, and enjoyable for our students. As Gabe has mentioned, a lot of students view history as, I have to listen to this boring lecture and answer these questions, and it's not. Everyone is here because they have a love and passion for history. Okay, and our goal is to get our students to feel that, even if it's just for an hour. Get them to enjoy and appreciate history. Enhance and enrich what our students or what our teachers are doing in their classrooms. A lot of times, as the kids walk through the lab, they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember my teacher talked about this the other day." So it just kind of reinforces, enriches what our teachers are doing. Develop historical thinking skills. We want our students to think. We want them to be able to break down primary sources. We want them to be able to synthesize, analyze, look at cause and effect, put items in the context of a time period, okay? Provide students multiple ways to learn, experience, and see the work historians do every day. That's gonna lead us to kind of what Gabe is doing, okay? One of my goals when I first started this is I want my students to have the same experience I had when I was in college working at the Lawrence History Center. I want them to be able to break down documents, to preserve things, to digitize things. I'll let Gabe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started working specifically in the lab at the beginning of this summer. And one of the first kind of things I jumped on, which I'll talk about in a few slides, is that kind of taking a single object, whether that's a picture, talk about the helmets, could be any of the objects in the lab, researching it and then connecting it to other things. This right here, this is a diary. Philip J. O'Connell, he fought in World War I. He's from Lawrence, Massachusetts. Mr. Sheehy's actually doing a presentation on him in France later on.
So one of the cool things, being a teacher, it allows you a lot of opportunities to go and explore. I was selected by National History Day to travel over to Europe as part of the Fallen Soldiers program, where you have to research somebody who is buried in France, who died during World War I, and put together a eulogy, kind of put together a story of their life. So one of the cool things that the Lawrence History Center has is they have Philip O'Connell's diary from the war. So I scanned it, scanned the whole thing. And one of the other history aides started to transcribe it. So we're digitizing things. All of our World War I stuff has been digitized. Start to transcribe diaries, things like that. Gabe and my other aide have done a great job of managing, putting up exhibits, taking exhibits down, just kind of to give them a broad brush of what it's like to be an archivist, what it's like to be in museum studies, so that they can see that history is not just, oh, if I want to be a history major, I got to be a teacher. You don't. There's so many different ways that you can still be part of history. Okay. And research. Gabe's going to talk about what he researched.
Yeah, absolutely. So here you see, this is a postcard. That's the front of it. There's soldiers, and then that's the back. And those are the names of each soldier. 1 is on the left, 8 is on the right. And so on the first day, I found this postcard. It was on one of the tables. This is back in the World War I unit. These are soldiers from World War I. And I picked it up, and I was looking at the uniforms and everything. I turned it over, and I found these names. And I realized that if I could, find one of these names somewhere, Ancestry.com, just on Google, just trying to figure out who these people were, that would be something really interesting to research. So I was going through the list, researching names, trying to figure out where they're from. And number 6, Carl Holes, I found on Ancestry.com. And on the next slide, it shows.
Just a quick kind of side on this. I bought these pictures at like an antique store in Maine. So just keep that in mind, in Maine.
So here, when I was doing my research, I managed to find a lot about Carl Holes. He's from Guide Rock, Nebraska. He was a soldier during World War I. He actually died, unfortunately, in France. And when I was doing research, this is his actual obituary that was in his Guide Rock newspaper. That's his draft registration card. We found more documents. These are just 2 of the more important ones. And so this was, like I mentioned, this was the first week I had been researching. And I probably spent 3 or 4 hours already. And I had found some things like, there are 3,000 mentions of Carl Holes and wherever. But I hadn't found anything that's absolutely 100% the person that was on this postcard that Mr. Sheehy bought in Maine. And until I came across this. And it was, so Mr. Sheehy at the time, he was in a meeting with some other teachers. And I was so excited that I almost actually went into his meeting just to tell him, hey, I found this.
You really should have. It was a really boring meeting.
Yeah. And so that kind of just pure excitement was what I knew that I personally wanted to, and we agreed that that's something that we want to convey to our students. Because 3 hours of my time and, turned these results, and it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. While one name did yield results, there were 7 others that, while I might have found mentions or locations, I couldn't really find anything of substance. But this obituary, tells us, stuff about him, and we have it transcribed somewhere else. But if we can read this obituary and we can learn about him and his life and about Guide Rock, and it's kind of sets us down this path where we can learn so much about just one person. And while it wasn't easy, it took several hours, but this is something that we really hope to convey to students, because not every student will want to sit down for 4 hours to find a little bit of information. I would love to do that. And so it's up to me and Mr. Sheehy and other students that are really, truly interested in history to put in that work in order to find these results to teach our students.
Gabe is obviously one of the reasons why I want to do this. The excitement that he had in finding that, I knew that was one piece of why this is so special, and what we're trying to do here is so special. We're going to talk in a couple of minutes about other students who really don't like history. I mean, Gabe loves history. Regardless of what I had given him, he would have been successful and found all kinds of things about the other soldiers. How can our teachers utilize the lab? There's several ways. One, they can take them in there. Okay, the room isn't super big, so it does present some problems, especially now we keep loading it with artifacts. It's getting tougher and tougher to bring people in. But teachers can access the lab by bringing their students in there. They just schedule a time. I open up the door. They come on in. Usually they develop some kind of activity that their students are going to be doing. everything else.
Yeah, and the really cool thing about the lab is while I believe this is set up, is this World War II at the time?
This is World War II.
Yeah, so this is set up for World War II at the time. You know, in World War II, obviously a war, so a lot of military history. But a student can go in there, a teacher can go in there and see something, and they don't have to, you know, only research the military aspect of it. You know, the 1940s, there was a war going on, but there was also people's domestic lives going on. And so there's kind of two sides to every story, and so any single one of these artifacts or, you know, newspaper clippings or pictures or anything can be researched both from the military point of view as well as the domestic point of view. And there's so many ways to take lessons off of that. And so that it's not just, you know, oh, let me bring the kids in here to, you know, look at some helmets. It's take them in here, see what they find. You know, maybe it could be like a scavenger hunt sort of event. And it's not just, you know, find pictures of planes, pictures of tanks, helmets. It's, you know, what did civilians do? What was the propaganda like? You know, what was maybe the life of a teenager back in the 1940s in America? Things like that.
Or what's that thing, right there, that old computer? It's really fascinating what kids get attracted to, and I'll get to that later. But kids are always fascinated. At times when I've taken adults in there, they're like, "There's so much stuff. It's like tough to like see everything." Another option for teachers who don't feel comfortable. I mean, you could break stuff. I brought the school committee in there on Thursday. And they're stepping on things, they're knocking things over. They're almost worse than students. But another option is to take items out. On 9/11, we have a bunch of framed 9/11 materials. We have a bunch of 9/11 newspapers and magazines. A teacher took them out and did her own gallery walk around her classroom in a confined setting that she felt comfortable in. Some stuff on the Bread and Roses strike. Teacher was doing labor strife, so we have a bunch of framed posters that she took out, and, you know, again, another gallery walk. This was kind of cool. A teacher last year took these items. He was studying the 1950s, 1960s, and he was looking at how technology has changed and how technology made life easier for people. So kind of looked at the vacuum, the TV, radio. So just, again, kids could be like, oh, what's that? Look at that, that vacuum's weird. You know, just to get them excited and kind of looking at things in a different way. We have digitized a lot of things. These are horrors of war cards that I got a whole bunch of. They highlight the Japanese invasion of China, the Spanish Civil War, and the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. And one of our teachers took these scans that we had and created a document-based question around them. So again, us digitizing all this stuff allows our teachers to then use it and manipulate it in different ways. Numbers of students in the lab. You can see that in September, we had 130 students come in. In January, this is a 2-day span. We had 115 students come through the lab. It was kind of crazy. It took up my whole couple of days. And the courses, I'll read these to you. AP Euro Global Thought, American Thought, which are 2 English and history classes. US history, 9th grade English. We had a World War I exhibit set up, and they were reading All Quiet on the Western Front, so they came in and looked at that. French 3, we have a bunch of postcards. Some are in German, some are in French. My goal is eventually to get some students who are in the AP German, AP French sections to come in and translate some of the stuff that we have. Have a bunch of cigarette cards from Germany. I think they were made right before Hitler came to power, or around when he came to power. So very interesting perspective on World War I. Be great to have that translated and accessible for our for our students. Choir. How did choir be coming in? They were doing stuff on World War I, songs about World War I, and we have a bunch of songbooks, so they came in to look at some of those songbooks. So again, these items and objects can be accessed throughout a lot of courses. I'm hoping that in North Andover, we're gonna kind of roll this out K through 12, And object-based learning is going to become something that all of our students are doing from elementary all the way up to high school. Teachers taking stuff out of the lab and utilizing it. 245 students were able to utilize materials from the lab in their classroom. Gabe, you want to go over what kids said about this?
Yeah, so after taking one of the, I believe it was a group of sophomores.
Yes.
So a group of sophomores, like we said, one of the ways to experience the lab is to go into the lab and have teachers bring classes in. And so a teacher brought her sophomores in, and so we had each of them write responses. And so the responses fluctuated as far as like whether it was good and bad reviews. And so, using those responses, we're able to take away what are we doing well, what are we doing improperly, and which things would students like more of, which things would they like less of, and what really actually can teach students. Kind of like I said, I really do love history, so I am biased because you can hand me anything in the lab and I'll be fascinated with it. Whereas some other students, you really have to find that one specific thing, and that's what's going to draw them in. And so using responses and feedback, we can constantly kind of tweak the program, tweak the lab in order to move forward.
I mean, just this right here, because it helped the war and it made it easier to visualize what that time was like. Again, just to kind of put students in the context of that time period. Kids really just enjoy looking at the influence that soldiers and civilians had. Offers a different way of learning. That's kind of a recurring theme. There were some of these that look at, I like science, and I found it was kind of interesting. I had like a popular science from 1918, and it was some crazy tank thing that rolls around. Kids thought that was fascinating, that they're thinking of these different advancements in technology. So again, just tying in other kids who are not interested in history. Okay. That person has terrible handwriting. Tough to read. So here, I'm going to talk about a couple activities that we did. With the museum walk, one of the teachers gave them a source analysis sheet. So they had to find a postcard somewhere in the museum walk, a newspaper somewhere in the museum walk, different artifacts that they could break down and analyze. Again, just to understand and interpret primary sources. Change over time, a time hop activity. I was teacher. This is something that I created with my AP Euro class. With an AP class in general, you're kind of stuck to time. So we were taking down the World War I exhibit, but I wanted my students to see it. So I put together this time hop activity that looked at change over time. We were currently studying the French Rev. So I tasked them with, we're gonna go up there, what things have changed from the French Rev to World War I, and what things have stayed the same, okay? And again, a lot of the technology changed, but some of the countries were still the same. So they were able to kind of look at that and see how in a less than 200 years, society had drastically changed. Synthesizing, how do things connect to other time periods? Students had great discussions with their teachers connecting objects to today, objects to things that they studied before. So again, just developing those critical thinking skills through the museum walks. Cause and effect, again, just some of the things that they can do. There's a change over time activity that I really enjoy, and it's not really history specific, it's more object specific. And you can see here, these are admissions tickets for Disneyland. And again, kids, when you're talking about how to teach with objects, oh, Disney World, I was there with my parents like a couple months ago. That's a way to bring them in. And they're gonna be learning historical thinking skills without even knowing it, okay? So, 1970s admissions ticket. These are admission tickets. It's a great forearm, Gabe. Great hand model, I guess. Those are fast passes, more like more current fast passes. So then you can start breaking it down. Why in the 1970s are they using paper? Why today Do they have fast passes? What's the point of a fast pass? Why are they using paper? Why are they using different technology? Just to get them thinking of how things change in that. And, you know, it leads to all kinds of great discussion. Future, we'd like to continue our veterans grant. We're really looking forward to kind of collecting some of the oral histories and then creating mini exhibits for them. Digitizing and properly cataloging the material. I wish I had more time to do a lot of the things archivists should be doing, creating numbers and organizing everything. But we're going to continue to work on that. Expanding the collection, continuing to grow, and to have objects that really hit all of our curriculum. And creating more lessons and activities like I showed some of you. Talk about a couple of our favorite pieces, and then I'll open it up to any questions that you guys might have.
Yeah, so the one on the left here, there's two pieces, and then I'm kind of explaining them. These two belt buckles are arguably my two favorite artifacts that we have in the lab. They are, as you might be able to tell, they're Nazi belt buckles that actually were once used by Nazi soldiers. And the reason I find them so fascinating is because as an American who's never been to Europe, I have never come into contact with German soil or people who have lived in Germany their entire lives. But you know, living only 30 minutes north of Boston, I know several people, or I have a connection to American history. Boston's a huge center for that. My great-grandfather fought in World War II, but from the American side. So if I were to have a belt buckle with an American flag, that's not super crazy because, I mean, Mr. Sheehy has two grandfathers who also fought in the war. That's not that uncommon to know someone or know of someone, or just even see in a book like, oh, this was an American military uniform, because we're on the home front. But the Nazis lost the war. We aren't from Germany, and so all these factors kind of coming together. The fact that there are two actual belt buckles that can sit in a student's hand in North Andover, Massachusetts,
How did they get there?
years ago. And I just think that's so fascinating that, especially if you look at the history of Nazis, World War II, and then even that can even dive into, who sponsored the Nazis, who made their things, Hugo Boss, Mercedes-Benz. There's so many ways to take these two simple pieces of brass, and I just have really always found that very interesting.
This is one of my favorites. I was at a flea market up in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and I was walking across a table, and that was there. I was like, whoa, like $15, I got that. Started researching this guy, George Bourgon. He was from Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Again, that could be another whole research project that we haven't gotten into yet. I love the pictures. I love the imagery of it. I just think it's really cool. The kids kind of gravitate towards it. Gabe likes this one, and the other aide, who's in there right now, really likes this one. You want to explain why?
This I would say is my second favorite piece in the lab. Not just because it's colorful. It is very nice though. I like what it represents and kind of what it tells me in such a simple. It's a cartoon. It looks like a Microsoft like a Sheets slide. It's very simple, but at the same time it tells us so much. So what it is, it's a postcard. And there is space to write on the back if you do have time to write a note, but the purpose of something like this was for soldiers who didn't necessarily have time to sit down, spend 10 minutes of their day writing a letter to someone at home. They could literally check off and kind of go through a whole letter. So you go, dear Mom, I just arrived by rail. I've been on guard duty. I need rest. And that concept is someone who, my phone's right there. I don't think I've ever written a letter to you, Mom. I'll get to that. I would just text you, write you an email, see you in person. And so, this makes me think, like, which soldier, had this in his pocket? Who was he going to write it to? What was he going to say to them? What would he have said to them if he wasn't, in France, in the Pacific? And so I just think that we think of like, you maybe read Soldier's Diary, you watch a movie, and letters is really the only way that they could communicate with people back at home. But there's so much going on in the war and so much commotion that maybe a soldier didn't have time to write a letter. And so this is kind of one of the ways that they would talk. Plus, just saying like, dear gang.
Or maybe this was the only thing that they could write about.
Yeah.
Another perspective of it.
Yeah. And so I just have always been intrigued. It's colorful, it's nice.
Picture on the left, great woman invited me over to her house in North Andover to get some uniforms. She was cleaning out her mother's house, and she had some great Navy uniforms and some Army uniforms. Then very strangely, she's like, "Oh, come into my basement." I made sure I called some people beforehand. Hey, I'm at this address. If you don't see me in a couple hours, please come and get me. I'm tied up. But she asked me if I wanted this cash register. I said, yeah, sure. Kids, one of the first things that they do is run over to that thing and start just hitting it because they want to touch it, they want to experience it. Picture on the right. I think the IT director, he brought up a computer for us so that we could digitize some stuff. He also brought up an old Mac computer that, again, kids love. He's like, hey, I have this weird machine. Do you want it? I was like, yeah, sure. Didn't tell me what it was. Just kind of threw it in my room. I'm like, it looks cool. Never really researched it because, I have a billion other things to research and find out about. One kid, when he went into the lab, gravitated right towards that thing. He started trying to play with it, figure out what it was. I had no idea. He found the patent number and researched and found that it was the Topmatic knotting machine. I'm not really sure what a knotting machine does. He sent me a video and all this kind of stuff, but just the excitement in objects, and you could see it there, I think it knots like thread or something. But look, it's cool. But if you guys have any questions, want to get in touch with me, this is how to get in touch with me. I'll open it up to questions now. We have a couple minutes if you have any.
Not a question, but just more of a comment. What you guys are doing is absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you.
As a junior in college right now, this is the stuff that I'm doing, and if I had access to that in high school, I probably wouldn't have changed my major 5 times. The access that you're giving these students to tangible artifacts as well as the knowledge of the processes is absolutely amazing and something you should do.
Thank you.
So I have a question. This is really great. I'm so happy you guys have these resources. But I went to a really, really tiny high school in rural Washington State, right, Idaho, and we didn't have the money or the space or the access to this kind of stuff. Do you have any plans on working with other schools and trying to bring what you have to other places?
I'd like to. I was down in DC last week with a tour, and I contacted the Smithsonian, and they have a object lab, and they offer professional development. So I would eventually, I think this is great, obviously, and I'd love to get this in other places. And a lot of the items, they don't need to be anything super special. I mean, you could go to anybody who wants to get rid of a bunch of crap, you could just donate everything, and you have the base there. But I'd like to eventually get out there and do more. I think it would be great.
Yeah, we also we met with an archivist last week, and just in general, the process of digitizing, and cataloging and putting everything together into one kind of cohesive online format, which can then be accessed by anyone in the world. I don't know if we'll get that far.
And then you could take it to a place, like
yeah.
if you had objects that, like, if somebody really wanted to do something on this topic, if it was made available through a digital database, we could then take that box or whatever to that location and teach a lesson or something.
Hi, fantastic. So I just wondered if I could get some demographics. So 135 students sounds great if there's 200 students, but not if there's 10,000. So I wonder if you have some demographics of the school, and if there are any explicit changes that you saw in your assessment data. So were students getting high grades? Were they reading more? Are there any kind of tangible?
I haven't done the long-term studies. I'm debating whether to go get my PhD. That'd be a great topic right there. Thanks. So there's 4,000 kids in this school. Not everyone has history at all times. I'd say there's 12 people in the history department. I'd say half of them.
It's bigger than my university's history.
Don't tell my boss that. He's trying to cut some history. I don't want him to cut the history department. I'd say half of them are currently utilizing it. Once we start rolling out, I think more professional development. If there's any teachers in the room, just block your ears. Most teachers are very lazy. And you have to almost give them okay, here is how you do it. So this is only a year old. This is less than a year old. So rolling it out, getting lessons, getting those kind of things, it's a process, and I'm working on it. I'd like to make it, please come on in. Here's how easy it is. So the numbers sound small. I've talked to different historical organizations. When they saw those numbers, they're like, I can't believe that many people came in, because small historical societies don't have 100 people walking through their doors in a month span. And it's going to grow. Don't have the numbers yet on how that translates into the academic side of it, but there's my thesis. Up there.
Yeah, so you talked about the glory of connecting the dots and finding the obit.
Yeah.
Have there been situations for you or your peers where you've gone down a certain road in terms of making an assumption, and then you've had to find out through research you're disappointed because something didn't quite come together the way you'd hoped?
Yeah, the internet's a terrible place. Yes, a lot of the research it's not anything that's necessarily been taught to me, in the sense of I kind of just maybe start with a name or a location, kind of any shred of evidence that I have, and I try to go from that, and whether that's Googling Carl holes in quotations and Nebraska in quotations a billion times, or maybe using the school library and going through books like that. But oftentimes, kind of like I had said, I had spent 3 hours just on that specific postcard, and up and use the 6th person, so there was 5 dead ends. And that, while that is very disappointing, it's also kind of taught me an appreciation for that final goal, or that final, just reaching that final conclusion. And I think that there's so much in the lab that for as many dead ends that there will be, there'll be just as many stories and research projects. But I don't want to be the one to find all of those. I want other students, Mr. Sheehy, when he's not doing his other billions of things.
I'm excited for next trimester. We're going to start our veterans grant. Gabe's going to be doing a lot with interviewing veterans and then researching more of their story. And thankfully, this trimester, twice a week, I would have meetings during the period that Gabe was in the lab. So he would want to talk to me and be like, I got to go to a meeting to talk about a meeting, to talk about another meeting. So this trimester, I don't have meetings during the time I'm with him, so I'll be able to kind of guide him a little bit more through some more research, which would be great. Over here, then I'll go to Bethany.
I have 3 things. First of all, do you allow visitors to come to your lab? Like if we said to, for instance, I have high schoolers, and I could tell the teacher, you've got to check out, could they contact you and come see what you're doing?
Yeah, we're always, as long as you contact me, we'll figure out a time and get that going.
And also, I noticed you're an AP Euro teacher. Are you planning to go to Europe to find some artifacts? Or
Well, I'm going to Europe for the National History Day, so if they let me sneak away, I definitely want to try to find some kind of shops and
market.
smuggle some things
Yeah,
out.
and then I just wondered if you could take some of these artifacts to a broader audience in the school. I know there are often locked cases around, or things like that. Would you
So we're working on
size it a little bit?
we're working on different things. Everything costs money. We're on the budget like this. We're thinking, I actually have some old windows. We're going to make some display cases out of some old windows and stuff like that, and maybe put them in other parts of the school so people can see them. Bethany?
My question is for you, Gabe. I get to see Kathy all the time, so I think that I work in small museums, and I think that we are very tempted to think that we need to reach young people by involving technology. And one of the things that I'm sensing from you is that, and maybe you can advise me,
Sure.
but that there's sort of a blowback against that of wanting to get back to the real object that you can put in your hand. So having a picture of a belt buckle, you spoke very eloquently to the idea that this belt buckle is something that has this incredible story because you're holding the physical objects. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the sort of real object-based learning and technology either working together, or you think that it's, I don't need to see any more touchscreen kiosks.
And so there was a great presentation earlier from the gentleman over there who he kind of got my mind thinking specifically about that question. And I think the number one benefit or the pro of technology, and especially in tangent to learning and history, is the convenience. A few questions have been about, can I access this from somewhere else? And if everything's digitized, then yes, you can. And so that's huge. But then there's also a huge amount of value to, like you said, holding that belt buckle, because it's more than just a belt buckle. It can teach so many stories, and it represents so much. And so I personally have found, again, I'm biased because I really do love history, but that seeing, even if it's like if it's a piece of cloth and it was like, George Washington once wore this, I would look at the thing at least like 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. And so, because I know what that represents, and then my mind would just start rolling like, when did he wear this? And I like just all the things I know, and I would just kind of start connecting that. And so, if we can kind of spur that thought with those tangible artifacts and kind of jar students from their history is boring, this isn't fun, history was 50 years ago, sort of thing, then I think that is definitely more beneficial than an iPad, which is, it's very nice for presentation, like all this technology makes our work come together quite well. But I think that the, kind of like the raw, sort of unrefined aspect of history is incredibly important.
We're definitely cool to hang out because the session later, but I'll let everybody go to the next session. If you want to stick around, I'm happy to talk to you guys. Appreciate it. You can see why I brought Gabe. He's very eloquent. Thank you all.
What percentage?
Yeah, so not there are a lot of like displays. All sorts of things.